I thought we'd talk some about your book, Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilizations.
Yeah, I just finished that. Last week, so yeah, it's off at the publishers. Actually, that should be out in a couple of months, and another one, Financial Vipers Venice, which is I've been waiting for it to come out from this publisher for a year, and it's still not out. But it will probably be out, I hope, around the same time as Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. And that may be kind of good in a way because, like all my books, they're connected, and those two are connected in a very weird way. Well, they all are, but it'll be interesting to see, how people react to it, because I think Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilizations, if people are expecting the book to be about, secret wars with ETs and ray guns, they're going to be in for a huge disappointment, because that's not what it's about at all. There's a little bit of that in it, but not much.
Well, the title also has UFOs in it.
Yeah.
And oligarchs.
Yeah.
And
space secrecy.
Yes.
Yeah, UFOs, oligarchs, and space secrecy. It's really that book is part of the series of little mini-series of books that I started with Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops, and then the second one was Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, and this one is Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilizations. And the Clash of Civilizations that I have in mind principally is I'm borrowing Richard Dolan's idea of a breakaway civilization. In other words, the technocrats that were entrusted with the UFO secret and trying to investigate it and emulate the technologies and so on, that he had the idea that this would have, over time, if left alone long enough and given enough money, would have constituted itself as a kind of a breakaway civilization. And that's really an arresting idea, because, like I pointed out in Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops, when you've got a breakaway civilization, the very word civilization connotes culture. In other words, a way of looking at things that's almost subconscious and subliminal. Mm-hmm. And if you stop and consider what he's suggesting, what he's really suggesting is a culture so radically different than the one that you and I live in every day.
Yes.
That it perceives things in a very different way. It has a totally different science. It's probably much more advanced than anything that you and I know publicly.
Yeah.
And all of this colors its outlook. So what I've been trying to do more than anything else is in these books to reverse engineer that culture, how it came to be, what its financing mechanism was, and that of course was most of the previous book, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. And then in this book, I'm trying to illustrate the clash of views of that culture, the science that it may have access to, and the way it thinks about things in science versus the kind of science that we know publicly. And the other thing that I'm concerned about in this most recent book, and it goes all the way back to things that you and I have discussed for so long in the Cosmic War series, is it's a twofold thing that I'm trying to do in this last book, in this series. And the first is to examine the assumption that if there are extraterrestrials, then they must perforce be millennia in advance of us.
Yes.
I have always taken issue with that assumption on two scores. Most people mean it in a technological sense, but there are some people that mean it also in the moral sense. And I don't see any reason why one has to assume either one. they may be in advance of us, but I don't think it's by decades or centuries. It may be mere decades. And that's something I examine in this book at great length, because my other concern in this book, GeorgeAnn, is to illustrate the thinking of that breakaway civilization and how they might have perceived the situation that they felt themselves to be in. And it's that point that really is the centerpiece of the book, because what I'm arguing is that they would have looked at all the records, ancient records that talk of genetic engineering of mankind, of cosmic wars, of fantastic planet-busting technologies and weapons and capabilities of traveling extreme interstellar distances and so on and so forth. They would have looked at all these texts, and they would have noticed the common thread in all of them was that not only were these ETs presumably having a big hand in the emergence of the human race and human civilization itself, but that also in almost all traditions there is something that I call the Tower of Babel moment of history. Okay?
Yes.
And you and I have discussed this, all the way back, I think it was like the 7th or 8th recording in the Cosmic War when we started talking about the Tower of Babel. And the reason I put it in the Giza Death Star books and in the Cosmic War is because, I had to plant the seeds that early to get to this point in this book.
Yeah.
Where you would have a technologically capable elite dealing with advanced technologies and trying to create technologies to emulate the performance of UFOs, all right?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and in the course of doing that, GeorgeAnn, I came to the conclusion they had to have considered the UFO phenomenon, not simply from the standpoint of reports, but also from the standpoint of historical reports.
Yes.
In other words, they would have looked at the phenomenon as perhaps being something very, very old, centuries old.
Mm-hmm.
And that would in turn have brought to their attention all of these ancient texts about extraterrestrials inbreeding with human beings, the Old Testament, Genesis chapter 6, and so on. So, if they're considering these texts, then the next thing I think they would have perforce had to consider would have been this Tower of Babel moment, because almost all human traditions have some version of this event. And, Dr. DeHart and I wrote about this in Transhumanism a great deal.
Yeah.
And what stands out in every tradition that you read of this moment, being from the biblical to the Mesopotamian to the Mayan, whatever tradition you wish to look at, in every version, mankind is interfered with when he reaches the point that he has a great deal of unity and a great deal of capability that becomes a threat to the gods. So if we go back and look at the biblical version of the story, most people will recall that in the biblical version, God comes down and scrambles the tongues because, not that so much that humanity is doing something that's sinful, but because we will be able to do whatsoever we imagine to do. That's the reason.
Yeah.
And in the Mesopotamian text, in the Mayan Popol Vuh, it's also again very clear that for whatever reason humanity constitutes some sort of threat to God or the gods, and human unity and technological capability has to be broken. Okay,
mm-hmm.
we've discussed this before.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at what the UFO phenomenon would have looked like to the technocrats inside of the American National Security Establishment after the end of World War II.
Okay.
Now, if you go back to my book, Reich of the Black Sun, SS Brotherhood of the Bell, Secrets of the Unified Field, and all the way up to Roswell and the Reich, there's a reason I'm writing the books in the order I'm writing them. And those books came in that position in the series of books that I've put out for a reason. The reason is as you and I have discussed before, I don't think Roswell was an extraterrestrial event at all.
Right.
In fact, if you read Roswell and the Reich carefully and the documents that every ufologist in the world talks about, what they don't like to point out to you is the fact that those Air Force intelligence collection memoranda and analyses that were circulating in the immediate months after Roswell, their major concern wasn't extraterrestrials. Their major concern was they're looking at something Nazi.
Yeah.
Okay? So in other words, my take has always been that this would have sent panic through the halls of power in the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies because simply politically it meant that they were facing the old enemy, and now the old enemy was out there somewhere and they knew not where. And they were continuing to investigate all this technology, okay? So we have to play catch up for that reason.
Yeah.
The second thing they're confronted with is, of course, the Soviet Union. They have to contain and roll back communism. So the immediate need that they have to develop is to develop reconnaissance methods to find out, number one, where these Nazis are and what they're doing, and number two, what the Russians are up to. So this is the impetus behind the spy satellite, okay? But now notice the third problem here is the UFO. And the reason I spent the time with the Nazis that I spent is because not so much I'm trying to disprove an extraterrestrial source for UFOs, but quite the reverse. And here it comes.
Oh, boy.
If you go back to the year 1937, when Kenneth Arnold is having his UFO sightings, when the Roswell event occurs and all of this stuff, if you go back to that year and investigate the UFO phenomenon generally, what you'll quickly learn is that 1947 was one of those flap years. In other words, there were so many UFO sightings all over the world that they didn't really know what it was they were dealing with, all right? Now, here comes a key point of information. In the book, in the new book, I point out that the man who is behind, and please pay very close attention to what I'm about to say. This is a crucial point, and it's so crucial that most ufologists overlook it, okay? But it's a crucial point in order to understand the history of what's happening and the culture that's being formed in this breakaway group. With me?
Yes.
I'm not going to tell you who this man is. I talk about him in Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilizations. There's Murray in the background here.
Yes.
Wow, wow, wow.
He likes your book.
No, when he does that, I keep thinking that he's seeing a sexy bird outside.
Oh, dear.
But anyway, now, in Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilizations, I mentioned this gentleman who is in the National Security Establishment, in the technical analysis section of it, all right? Mm-hmm. He is closely associated with the German paperclip Nazis, all right?
Oh.
All right? So in other words, this man is a German American. So in other words, he speaks German. He's closely associated with these post-war paperclip Nazis that we brought over here, okay? Yeah. He is also in the circle of advisors around U.S. Air Force General Nathan Twining, and of course that name will send immediate alarm bells to anyone familiar with the UFO story. Because, of course, Nathan Twining is the U.S. Air Force General that was sent to New Mexico during the Roswell event. This was the American Air Force General that was the head of the Air Technical Intelligence Command at Wright-Patterson Field in Dayton, Ohio. In other words, this was the guy if any debris is recovered at Roswell, this is the guy whose unit is going to analyze it. All right?
Okay.
And, of course, these two, the gentleman I'm not mentioning the name of, and General Twining, are in turn connected with the head of Air Force Intelligence, a fellow by the name of General Shulgin, Charles Shulgin, and they're in cahoots with a fellow by the name of General Earl Cabell, who, of course, is one of the directors of the CIA, and also the brother of the mayor of Dallas when Kennedy was assassinated, and he was also at one time a director of the CIA. Are we getting the picture?
Oh, yeah.
This is, these dots have to be connected in a certain order, in a certain way, otherwise you're going to miss the significance of the story. Now, this gentleman who is in the circle of advisors of General Nathan Twining is the man who is probably responsible for drafting the wording of General Twining's post-Roswell intelligence document. And this gentleman is also probably the gentleman who is responsible for drafting the wording of General Shulgin's intelligence collection memorandum that followed the Roswell event. Are you with me?
Oh, boy.
So in other words, what this gentleman is doing is he's concluding on the basis of his discussions with these paperclip Nazis, the examination of the whole Roswell incident and so on, that what they're looking at is Nazi. Insofar as the Roswell incident goes. But here's the curveball. This same gentleman concluded on the basis of the fact that they were confronted with such sheer numbers of UFO reports that not all of them could possibly come from Nazis or Russians or even American secret projects.
Wow.
Okay? So in other words, I want people to understand one and the same individual is behind more or less my sort of Nazi analysis of Roswell, but the same individual is also behind the subsequent conclusion that, hey, we're dealing with more than merely Nazi black projects or Russian black projects or American black projects. We may be dealing with something genuinely non-terrestrial.
Oh, boy.
This is the same individual. This is very important for people to understand. So it's not an either-or situation within ufology. And in spite of modern ufology's attempts to make it this way or to waffle on certain historical details, what I'm saying is the Nazi hypothesis of the Roswell incident does not contradict the record. In fact, it is part of the record. And that record also includes these people coming to the conclusion that we may be dealing with something genuinely non-terrestrial. Now, with that in mind, and I hope I'm making sense here, with that in mind, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the emerging national security establishment and the potential they're faced with. Okay?
Okay.
The first thing that they're going to look at, the first thing that they're going to conclude is, okay, even though UFOs may have been a persistent part of human history going back as far as there's written records, it is also true that this activity begins to spike quantitatively off the charts during and immediately after World War II and never lets up. Okay? Now, what happens during World War II that heralds a completely new era? What happens?
Oh, boy. After World War II?
During and after World War II.
Well,
what's the new era that we're in?
The nuclear.
The nuclear era, precisely.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing, as I point out in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, is that UFOs show an extreme interest in human nuclear activity.
Yes.
They monitor nuclear sites. They monitor nuclear weapons sites. They turn on and turn off ICBMs and so on and so forth. So in other words, In other words, this breakaway civilization would have concluded that whoever is doing this, our nuclear weapons are of concern to them.
Yeah.
With me so far?
Yes.
Now, why would nuclear weapons be of concern to someone coming from another world? This is what you've got to ask yourself.
Well, maybe we shake the medium.
That's part of it, yes. Bingo.
Okay.
That's part of it. Nuclear weapons have the ability to shock the medium. So in other words, they would have detected nuclear explosions. And I go into this in the new book as to why this is so.
Oh, all right? Boy.
Yeah, oh boy. Now, what this means, GeorgeAnn, is nuclear weapons are also a gateway technology to the manipulation of that medium. In other words, there's something about them that poses a threat. Now, obviously, putting a nuclear weapon on a rocket's not going to be a threat to someone traveling here from the planet Saturn or even further, okay?
Yeah.
Because you have a long time to follow the trajectory and shoot it down.
Yeah,
okay?
that's right.
And it's moving at the speed of the Pony Express on top of it. So, you know, it's not rockets that they're concerned with. It's the nuclear energy itself. And this would have told the breakaway group that they're dealing with, unbeknownst to them, that they would have quickly concluded that nuclear weapons are somehow a gateway technology to something else. And there, GeorgeAnn, right there is the argument against the fact that ET is millennia ahead of us.
Oh.
When we detonated the bomb, we caught up real fast.
Oh, my goodness.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Now, put yourself in their mentality concerning the Tower of Babel moment.
Oh.
This would have meant that even though they hadn't figured out what all of this meant, they would have figured out that we pose a potential threat to whoever these people are. And we have to play our hand and cards and develop our technologies very carefully in the next few decades to avoid a repeat of the Tower of Babel moment.
Well, maybe if we'd stop developing these damnable weapons for killing, you know...
It doesn't... you're missing the point. It's not the weapons. I said it's the processes of nuclear energy.
Okay.
Okay? It doesn't matter whether or not you're actually producing weapons or not. It's the potential that the process represents that constitutes the potential threat.
Oh.
You know, it's the same conundrum. If you have the access to the processes of manipulating the physical medium, you may not be producing weapons from it. You may be just wanting to produce energy from it. But the fact that you know the process means you can weaponize it, and that's going to constitute a threat.
Yeah. Potentially
to whoever, whether you're producing weapons or not. That's my point. This is what people have to understand. So in the mentality, the way I'm reverse engineering the culture of this breakaway group, they're thinking, okay, we've got a triple potential threat here. We've got Nazis, post-war Nazis, we've got communists, and then we've got whoever's flying around and all these other things. So the first thing they're going to try and figure out is nuclear weapons. The second thing they're going to try and figure out is how do we avoid a repeat of the Tower of Babel moment.
Yeah.
In other words, them coming down here and messing us up again and throwing us back to the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
You see? That's the very real danger. There's a period of history, in other words, I'm arguing, that begins with the advent of the nuclear weapon and UFOs in conjunction with each other. There's a period of history that begins when those two things happen at the same instant.
Oh, boy.
And we're still in it.
Yeah.
And the strategy, I'm arguing, that they're going to... I began arguing this in Saucer Swastikas and PSYOPs and in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. The strategy is, first of all, they're going to have to develop technologies that can keep an eye on all three potential threats at the same time.
Yeah.
So in other words, this is the impetus behind the spy satellite.
Yeah.
Colonel Corso, you know, who everybody makes fun of, I think that this man was actually telling us a great deal. because he put it very bluntly. At the same time that we were looking down on the Soviet Union and they were looking down on us, we were also looking up.
Yes.
And so were they.
Oh, boy.
You see? Because the long-term threat isn't each other. The long-term real threat that the Cold War represents is whoever's behind the UFO.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason for all the nuclear weapons to begin with.
Oh, boy.
It's that's the other part of it that never occurs to people. But if you figured out, all right, these people, whoever they are worried about our nuclear weapons, build more of them, so that if they do land here, we'll make it too costly for them.
Oh boy, Joseph.
You see what's going on?
Oh my
This is the and I want to point something out here. Richard Dolan says something so brilliant and so remarkable in his books on the breakaway civilization. He says that the UFO is the missing piece of modern history. In other words, it's the hidden presupposition that if you don't take it into consideration, nothing else that's been happening historically since the end of World War II will make any sense. And that's essentially what I'm arguing in these books. It's not only the hidden piece of history, it's the hidden piece of finance, because stop and think. If you're going to develop technologies that can emulate the capability of the UFO, what do you need? Well, you need a lot of money, and you need that money to be totally unaccountable to the public.
Yeah.
All right? So in other words, you need a hidden system of finance. You need to put the national security establishment directly in the financial world, and this is what they do. So in other words, it's not only the UFO is not only the hidden piece to history, it's the hidden piece to finance, and I think it's the hidden reason, therefore, why everything is really so non-responsive in the government and why they're really panicked.
Wow.
Because we're in that Tower of Babel moment. Now, one of the things that's going to result from this is if you figure out this physics, if you figure out why nuclear weapons are a gateway technology to something more, then stop and think what it means. It means that you have a totally different culture in terms of your energy supply.
Yeah.
You won't need petrodollars anymore, will you?
No.
So what are you going to back the currency with? Well, if you're going to keep the same kind of currency system in place, you'll need a finite resource that's trackable and privatized, like GMOs.
Oh, yeah, brother.
You see?
Yeah.
In other words, what I'm suggesting to you, and this is an idea that actually came from Catherine Austin Fitts when she was visiting here, so it's her idea, not mine. But, it's the kind of thing that when you sit around and talk about UFOs and financial fraud for 5 hours, it's the sort of thing, ideas that get laid out there. But her observation was, all right, if you really have these technologies, then you're going to try and move away from the petrodollar.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a sure sign of it. The other sure sign of it is the emergence of 3D printing. Now, clearly, in my opinion, GeorgeAnn, this is a technology that was developed in this Black Project's world.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, as a response and emulational technology of the UFO.
Yeah.
Why release this technology now into the public eye? Well, my answer is again, this is explainable by their perception that they're in the Tower of Babel moment.
Yeah.
Why? Because 3D printing allows you to bring manufacturing back to North America, but the neat thing about it is you don't have to have big, huge, centralized industrial plants.
Right.
It's dispersed. You don't present easy targets.
Oh, boy.
Now, oh boy, stop and consider the implication of that choice of words. This is what I think they're dealing with, GeorgeAnn. I think that they've been in this Tower of Babel mode since the end of World War II. And what this means And here's the clash of civilizations part. Not so much the clash between the hidden civilization and the public one, in human terms, but rather the clash of the hidden civilization and the non-terrestrial one, if there is any. Okay? Now, please note something, folks. I'm not saying whether ET really exists or doesn't. What I'm arguing is it's clear from the record that there are people in the national security establishment at that time who are setting up the national security establishment that think they do exist. And therefore, they're formulating their secret policies and long-term strategies on that basis. So it doesn't matter to the argument whether or not ET really does exist. All that matters is that there are sufficient people in sufficient places of power formulating policy and long-term research and strategy decisions who think they do.
Oh, my goodness.
You see?
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Okay?
Oh, gosh.
And, of course, that presents opportunities for all sorts of mischief, and I know exactly where you're thinking right now. And we'll get back to that.
Okay.
But let's assume, for the sake of argument for the moment, that they really do exist and that you're concerned about the long-term potential threat that they represent. So what are you going to do? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to play catch-up as fast as you can.
Yeah.
You are going to try and create technologies that draw ever closer to the emulational performance characteristics of the UFO.
Yeah.
And then you're going to let them know you have it.
Oh, boy.
Okay? You're going to display it to them. You think we don't have this? Yeah, look what we can do now.
Oh, brother.
And that includes shooting at them with the occasional ray gun.
Yeah.
Okay? But by the same token, in other words, you're gonna start playing bluff poker and keeping your fingers crossed that you're not going to get yourself into an interplanetary war that you can't win.
Yeah.
Until you're certain that you can win it. Okay?
Oh, brother.
Now remember the premise here is if nuclear technology is a gateway technology, then this means if you figure it out, you're not millennia or even centuries behind whoever, you're mere decades behind them.
Oh, my.
And with enough money, you can close that gap rather quickly. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this means you're also going to play psychological operations, not so much against human beings, but against them. You're going to try and make contact, and you're going to try and manipulate their perceptions.
Oh boy! Oh,
yeah, I know. This is a whopper. This is why Cosmic War, the book, had to come very early on in the series. Are you understanding now?
Yeah, we are.
This has been like a 13-year-long chess game for me.
Yes, it has. Wow.
So, all right. So, in other words, they're having to play psychological operations not only to mask the technology against humanity, but also to display it in shows of force, so to speak, against them. And I'll be very honest and tell people right out front, when they get this book, there is a chapter in it on crop circles. And the reason I included crop circles, I have been intending to do this for a long time, is because I think crop circles represent more than just an attempt of them to communicate with us, but rather an attempt of us to communicate with them, and in the process display a human technology that we can manipulate with a great deal of precision and control. So the hidden message being sent is if we can make all these pretty designs in a field of crops, you there?
Yes.
If we can make all these pretty designs in a field of crops, we can use this stuff and target things in a very precise way.
Oh.
You follow me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is all tied together, and there are other reasons that I think crop circles are part of this psychological operation that I get into in the book that I don't want to talk about right now until people can actually read and see what the details in support of the thesis are. and why they're doing it the way they're doing it. But again, it's partly for the reason that it's based in an historical approach to the problem. Okay? One going back centuries. All right? Wow. So, in other words, you're dealing with people, you know, when you sit right down, GeorgeAnn, and you reverse engineer the total culture of this breakaway group, you're dealing with people that certainly are thinking outside the box.
Yes.
And they're doing so in my opinion, in very intelligent and very creative ways. Let's just hope they don't miscalculate. Now, there's a final point to this Tower of Babel moment stuff, and that is that if you look at what I include in this book, I include a lot of stuff from what I call the lunatic fringe. Because, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, I'm not hearing anything. It sounds like the line got cut off or something.
Oh, no.
The stuff from the lunatic fringe I include for a very simple reason. What they're talking about, and by lunatic fringe here, folks, I don't mean the normal people you think of. By lunatic fringe, in this case, I mean Carl Sagan.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Carl Sagan and a few others. Okay.
Yeah.
In other words, for me, the lunatic fringe isn't what the alternative research community is saying. It's what the mainstream has been saying in this book. What I do is I point out, again, the idea that many celestial bodies in the local solar system space appear to be artificial. And this means that you're dealing with a scale of engineering that's enormous.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, let's again put ourselves in the shoes of the breakaway group. We've got all these UFOs flying around. They can't all be Nazi or American or communist black projects, okay?
Right.
So they're coming from somewhere, and they're someone else's, okay? Now, as we expand into outer space and discover all of these strange things out there, some of which are, again, of a scale of engineering that would boggle the mind, is that going to force them to hit the panic button? You betcha. Because it means not only do we have to emulate this stuff, we have to be capable and have the energy to build enormous things. Okay? Now, here's a thought. I want everybody just to kind of stop and think about this. Granted, 3D printing, as it's been released to the public, still has its bugs.
Yes.
But now, suppose you set yourself up in business at International Interplanetary Widgets and Gadgets Incorporated, all right, down in Texas. And you're contracted for a few $1 million to produce a certain part for the government. And you have no idea what this part is for or what it does. You've just got to produce a few 100,000 of them.
Yeah.
GeorgeAnn, what I'm suggesting is it is possible with 3D printing now for entirely covert production to be taking place right out in the open.
Oh, yes.
And no one knowing what they're really producing because they're not seeing the final assembled product. And that assembly may not even be taking place here on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh, boy.
So again, the idea is you've got to play a game of bluff poker with whoever's out there and convince them that you are capable of a lot more than perhaps you really are. Now, here's the bottom line that I arrive at in the book. Believe it or not, I conclude in the book that this breakaway group probably has, and this will stun most people, but it probably has technological parity with whoever. I'll say that one more time.
Oh.
That breakaway group, that very real human group, probably has technological parity with whoever.
Oh my gosh, Joseph.
Yeah.
Oh.
The problem is, the reason they're still playing bluff poker, the reason they're still, every now and then shooting the odd ray gun at the odd UFO, is that they do not have production parity with them. With me?
Oh my goodness.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So the real problem now isn't the technology, it's the production.
Oh.
The technology is so vastly expensive and, in my opinion, probably has to be engineered and handcrafted like a Swiss watch.
Yeah.
That the production is the difficulty.
Oh my goodness.
And this may account, in my mind, for why 3D printing just came out of nowhere.
Nowhere, yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's all the rage. We're printing arms, we're printing retinas, we're printing guns, we're printing prosthetic limbs. You name it, they're printing it.
Yes.
Okay? This may be the reason, ultimately, that this has come out of the woodwork. And I suspect that, again, the UFO is the hidden part of that story. So in other words, it's not technology that they lack parity, it's the production of it.
Oh my goodness.
It's the old pre-World War I Great Britain versus Germany thing. Germany has the bigger industrial base, but it has to use part of that industrial base in its defense expenditure to produce arms for the army, and therefore it cannot keep up with naval production with Great Britain. And now here's the implicit problem, and I mentioned that analogy with World War I for a very, very good reason, and you have to think about this carefully. If they were in the position, the Germans, of not being able to outproduce the British in terms of capital naval ships, then what did they do? They built them bigger and better, and able to absorb a lot more punishment. And the British found that out the hard way at the only major naval battle in World War I at Jutland. British ships are blowing up, and German ships are literally so pounded by the British that some of them are coming back to port, but able to do so with their bows underwater.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's so. In other words, the analogy here is very important for people to understand. I think that in terms of the Tower of Babel moment, hang on, it's okay, Murray. In terms of the Tower of Babel moment, that this is the other consideration these people are dealing with. And I think that if you do what Richard Dolan suggests, and again, he's suggesting a hypothesis, but to me it's a hypothesis that makes a great deal of sense.
Yes.
That if you re-inject the UFO as the hidden premise, the hidden driver of much politics, of much finance, of much policy, and so on and so forth in the post-war period, a great deal begins to make sense.
Wow.
Because look what's happening. I've said over and over that the oligarchs, the powers that be, look like they're afraid of something that they're not talking about.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is a big part of it.
Oh.
I think this is a big part of it.
Joseph, look at Bitcoin.
Yes.
You can buy cocaine with it, and it cannot be traced. I mean, the transaction.
Well, here's the other thing. Here, the financial aspect, I'm glad you mentioned Bitcoin and so on, because there's been all this talk about gold lately.
Yeah.
All right? Everybody wants their gold back, and the American Federal Reserve doesn't have it. Okay? And now the latest story out on the Internet is, well, it's all going to China, and the Chinese are melting it down and restamping it with their own marks and putting it in the People's Bank of the People's Republic of China.
Oh, dear.
In other words, they're stealing it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is the latest theme. And, I don't really care if the Chinese are stealing it. I don't care one way or the other. I do think what's really interesting here is I go back to something I argued in breakaway civilizations. And that is that gold would be the thing that you would be using if you were on the sly conducting any sort of interplanetary trade.
Yeah.
Okay? And why? Well, let's look at the scenario of Zecharia Sitchin. We've talked about him before in the Cosmic War series.
Mm-hmm.
In Sitchin's scenario, you have a planet that comes careening through the solar system once every 3,160 years. Okay?
Yeah.
And, of course, I've adamantly insisted from the get-go that this is not a plausible scenario. Because, hang on. Murray, stop it. Sorry.
That's okay. Murray's a lonely bird.
Well, sometimes he beeps and sometimes he doesn't, and today I guess is his day to beep. But anyway, that scenario of the planet careening through the solar system, I don't buy, because it's like throwing a rock into a smooth pond.
Yeah.
The rock is going to produce ripples, okay, and if the planets are bobbers bobbing on the top of the pond, then, the planet coming careening in is going to be like the rock tossed into the pond, and the other planets are going to be the bobbers on the pond. They're going to bounce up and down. Well, this isn't happening. The other problem I have with Sitchin's scenario is he's trying to justify or find a reason when he reads in ancient texts why these people that are coming to planet Earth are so obsessed with acquiring gold.
Yeah.
The scenario he comes up with is that they're using it in particulate form in a kind of chemtrail spraying operation to protect their own increasingly dissolving atmosphere on that one planet. Okay, that's basically his scenario. Well, hooey to all of it. I think the real hidden story here about gold is the white powdered form of it.
Mm-hmm.
The orbitally rearranged monatomic element gold, which does what? Remember from the Philosopher's Stone? And again, why did I put that book prior in this series? In its white powdered form, when gold is not only melted, but actually consumed, actually burnt to a crisp, what happens is the gold reduces to a fine white powder. Right?
Yeah.
Remember?
Yes.
Moses and the golden calf?
Yes.
Remember?
Yeah,
And that's an alchemical process, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. In that form, gold retains its chemical properties. It still reacts chemically the same way. But it loses 44% of its mass.
Okay, that would have to do with gravity, wouldn't it?
Bingo!
Yeah.
Would that make gold valuable?
Oh, yeah.
Especially in a technology that might be employing it for that purpose?
Oh, yes.
You betcha. Would that explain why they came here to begin with?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now, let's go back. You see where all this is going. Now, let's go back to covert wars and breakaway civilizations and all the time I spent in there on the bearer bonds scandals. Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
What were those bearer bonds? Well, they were bonds in enormous amounts of money, 500 billion, 500 million or $1 trillion, just astronomical amounts of money. And they're all gold-backed. Now, either someone is rehypothecating a lot of gold, okay, which we both agree on they are, or someone is producing a lot of gold. You see?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And if you can produce a lot of gold with the technology you've kept carefully hidden, you can rehypothecate what you produce. You see?
Oh, my gosh.
You see? And if it has any sort of value as an anti-gravity property, okay, even if it's only to show you how it works, then it's still valuable.
Oh.
And you're going to use it. So in other words, I suggested in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations that the vast expansion of credit that's represented by this hidden system of finance may represent not a fraudulent system, but rather a system with a hidden collateralization.
Yeah.
And the hidden collateralization is not only that gold, but here it comes, outer space.
Oh yeah.
What you find out there, which would, if you stop and consider just the mineral value of the asteroid belt alone, it would be in the quadrillions of dollars. Now, stop and think about what I just said. Where did we find quadrillions of dollars mentioned in recent history? Well, it's in the derivatives, okay?
Yeah.
So in other words, I suspect that all of this talk, and I get into this in the book as well, that all of this talk about mining asteroids and so on that NASA's talking about, and that they're budgeting, they're debating in Congress right now about how much money we're going to give and what are we going to use it to mine asteroids or are we going to go to Mars, okay?
Oh boy.
Now, stop and think what they're just admitting to you, folks. They're admitting that they have the capability to mine asteroids.
Yes.
And what they're also talking about, and I point this out in the book, they're talking about plucking these asteroids in near-Earth orbit, and hauling them to the moon and parking them in orbit there and mining them there.
Yeah.
Now,
that takes some pretty stiff technology to do that.
Bingo. Can you do that with rockets?
No.
Is that going to be cost effective?
No.
No.
Oh,
of course not.
Gosh.
So in other words, what I'm suggesting is all of this talk about asteroid mining and so on and so forth is probably they've been doing this sort of stuff for a while.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're talking about it openly now is a little clue that they've got some technological capabilities they haven't publicly admitted to yet.
Oh, yes.
And it's a little clue, perhaps, that there may be some commerce between this planet and somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm. My goodness.
Yeah, I know this sounds wackadoodle.
No, it doesn't.
But my point here is if you read the new book when it comes out, I've tried to restrict myself for the most part to mainstream sources. When I said earlier the lunatic fringe and then said Carl Sagan, I meant it because when you see what these people actually said, without so much as a how do you do, it makes the so-called lunatic fringe that they complain about look rather tame.
Right.
Right. You have to really stop and consider what they're really admitting when they talk about asteroid mining. If they're serious, it's an admission to technological capabilities. It's an admission to there may be being a permanent human presence on the moon already that we don't know about. Yeah. If you're going to mine things up there, it's kind of a handy thing to have a permanent presence there.
Yeah.
And for goodness sake, folks, when the Chelyabinsk meteor happened earlier this year, what most people forget is that the Russians came out and said, oh, by the way, we think we need to spend about $2 billion on our own asteroid defense system. Mm-hmm. And when I read the articles, GeorgeAnn, they were talking about, okay, well, we'll destroy these asteroids with a few hundred megatons or other more advanced things. Yeah. And that's exactly the way the Russian article put it. So in other words, they have something up their sleeve that's more advanced than a hydrogen bomb.
Oh, brother. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, either they're bluffing or they're not. I suspect they're not.
Soritsky.
Yes, exactly. Soritsky, duh.
Yeah, he's going to throw his lightning bolt.
Yes, Thor's going to throw his lightning bolt.
Oh my gosh.
So we're still in this Tower of Babel moment, and we're I think approaching the cusp. This is why I keep saying we're at a quantitative and qualitative turn at this juncture in human history like we've never been in before, except maybe during that cosmic war.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, Joseph.
Yeah.
Yikes. Well,
yeah.
You know, I was thinking, you know, if I was involved, had this dummy corporation set up a front, and I needed 20 million schwingeldingles, and I went to this corporation and had them farm out to find someone who could make me 20 million fingeldingles. Yeah, they could do it.
Sure, of course.
You know, easily, and put it together here to take elsewhere.
Yeah, you could be yes, exactly. You could be participating in a real honest to goodness genuine black project, producing stuff for it without even knowing it. Because, you know, the nice thing about black projects is they're all compartmentalized.
Yeah.
You know, assembly line A produces fingeldingles, and assembly line B produces widgets and gadgets, and on down the line. And it's shipped somewhere else to be assembled.
Yeah.
You know, that's the way we manufacture right now on this planet, even with simple, everyday, ordinary things like refrigerators or washing machines.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it could be done on a much larger scale and with much more sophisticated technology, but the principle is the same. So do I think that they might be getting ready for that sort of thing? Yes, I do. I really do. For one thing, just in terms of plain old geopolitics, they've got to bring manufacturing back to North America. Otherwise, their home base of power is considerably weaker, and that means in turn their position is. So, you know, if they're going to hold on to their power, they just simply have to figure out a way to do this. So you know, the long and short of it, GeorgeAnn, is when you throw the UFO into the mix, it complicates things, obviously.
Yeah.
But it explains a great many things.
Oh, yeah.
That are otherwise irrational and inexplicable behavior on the part of these oligarchs.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh, Joseph. Yikes. Well, I'm kind of speechless. They have got cures for things, and they are producing this food that is poisoning the current model, the current human model, to death. It's producing different kinds of cancers.
Yes.
All kinds of ailments.
Yes.
Connected with this.
Yes.
Is this part of the depopulation and at the same time part of the kind of grooming the planet for a new species?
It could be, but...
Because, Joseph, they have created artificial human DNA.
Yes, I know.
And that can be used, I mean, good grief. You know, there used to be an old joke about man creating man, and God says, yeah, well, go create your own dirt. I mean, we're getting to the point that we can do that.
It may be that that's a part of this scenario, but there's another possibility. If you're thinking like the breakaway group, you know, reverse engineering their culture again, their thought process, and if they're looking at these ancient texts in the same way and seeing that, oh, there's a possibility that someone else interbred with us in ancient times, then they're going to conclude the exact same things that I've tried to argue in my books. They're going to conclude that whoever they were, in order for that to happen, there had to have been a genetic compatibility to begin with.
Yes.
In other words, they're cousins.
Yes.
And if that compatibility was further tweaked and engineered so that any offspring could in turn reproduce themselves, then there's always going to be somewhere in the resultant genome a trace of that interbreeding. Now, assume for a moment, for the sake of argument, that maybe those people already returned and are already walking around on the street.
I think they are.
Okay, well, if you have concluded that they may be a threat, then one of the ways you deal with that threat is how? You make them sick. So in other words, GMOs may be a covert attempt, and again, this is high-octane speculation. I have not a shred of evidence for this. But you may be trying to deal with an overpopulation problem, not so much of humanity, but of somebody else that they don't want here. For whatever reason. Now, those reasons may be sound, or they may be irrational. We don't know. I do tend to think that the breakaway group was justified in concluding that the UFO represented a potential threat, if for no other reason than the hostile and provocative actions that many UFOs have taken toward human installations, human institutions, and so on and so forth. In the previous book, I talked about their obsession with our nuclear weapons, and in this book, I talk about other types of hostile or provocative activity. So, in other words, that breakaway group would have considered whoever was behind the UFO phenomenon to be a potential threat, and would have continued to regard it in that fashion until such time as it was able to make some sort of contact and to reassure itself of the bona fides of whoever was behind it. I suspect strongly, GeorgeAnn, that if there was a contact of that sort, a peaceful one, that it would have leaked by now, or at least been in some sense admitted. I suspect it's because the reality is we're dealing with something that may be stubbornly hostile to humanity. And that's the historic record. This is why I keep going back to the Tower of Babel moment. Whoever that was that came down here and messed around previously and got us into cosmic wars and blew up local planets, this isn't a nice group of people.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I think the decision was taken that, damn the torpedoes, we don't care if it's Yahweh or Lucifer or E.T. or whatever. This time around, we're going to be ready and we're going to defend ourselves.
Well, good. Well, I've asked you about this issue before.
Yes.
Privately.
Yes.
And the Gnostics have a very good take on this. And that is, when we're told that they first came here, they literally asked permission to create man. And they weren't really given permission. So, all this stuff kind of melds in together, Joseph.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
And you told me that position of asking to create man, let us create, is very old.
It is.
It's a very old, what do you call it?
It's present. It's present in traditions for a long time.
Yes. Okay.
You find it, oddly enough, in the cultural context of other traditions relating to this idea of an experiment gone wrong.
Yes.
And of course, let's bring the Gnostic point of view into the present discussion.
Okay.
If for the sake of argument that Gnostic doctrine were true, then what it means is at some point humanity was kind of abandoned or left to itself with the occasional observation going on, but all of a sudden humanity let off an A-bomb, and you detected it, and another one, and another one, and then several, and then H-bombs.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're thinking, there's trouble down on the farm.
Yeah.
The monkeys have the matches.
Yeah. Oh boy.
So you're going to monitor that, and you're going to try and but you can't, for whatever reason, you can't just step in and stop it.
Yeah.
All right, now let's go to another esoteric tradition. And I mentioned this in Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilizations, so it's coming up in the book. You'll be able to find some of the references. But they're in their Old Testament pseudepigrapha and so on. After the cosmic war, the war of the gods, the war of the Titans, the fall of Lucifer, whatever you wish to call it, I prefer cosmic war. Take the religious imagery out of it because that prejudices you as to who are the good and who are the bad guys.
Yes, exactly.
You have to examine their actual behavior, the record, and judge it on the basis of what they're actually doing rather than what they're saying.
Absolutely true.
But in any case, after this war, the other thing that happens is, and again, the analogy to post-World War I Europe is so very apt, because if you'll recall in the Cosmic War model, I talk about how the post-Cosmic War elites, the people that survive, are both the elites of the victors and the elites of the vanquished. And the elites of the victors take steps, you'll recall, to inventory the technology of the vanquished that, was going around blowing up planets and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah.
To inventory that technology and to cart some of it away to be used in other ways, and to destroy that technology that could not be used in any other way other than for destructive purposes, and then to hide the technology that couldn't be destroyed. Okay, remember that?
Yeah.
All right. What did the Allies do to Germany after World War I? Well, okay, we don't care if you're sitting smack dab in the center of Europe and are surrounded by a bunch of powerful nations.
Yeah.
You cannot have an army larger than 100,000 soldiers. You can't make any more nice big Bertha cannon and lob 2-ton shells at us. You cannot build any battleships greater than 10,000 tons displacement, and you can only have a few of those at that. You can't have any air force, and you're not allowed to have any tanks.
Oh, boy.
And on top of that, we're going to create a quarantine zone of all German territory west of the Rhine River.
Oh, my gosh.
That has to be completely demilitarized.
Yeah.
Completely. That's your quarantine zone. Okay? Now, let's look back at the Cosmic War. They did the same thing. They took an inventory of technology and said, well, you can't build this, you can't build that. And, of course, the Germans went right ahead and did so anyway, because, it's kind of foolish to assume that you're going to leave a country surrounded by France, Great Britain, and Russia and tell it not to have any means to defend itself. You know, it's just not going to happen, folks. You know.
That's right.
Nazis or no Nazis, it's just not going to happen. So the same thing happens at the end of the cosmic war. But the other part of the model is in those ancient traditions, there's also a quarantine zone.
Mm-hmm.
Planet Earth has been under a quarantine since that last cosmic war. The quarantine zone, if you believe all this, I should say.
Yeah.
That quarantine zone exists in two versions. Okay?
Okay.
Version number one is that there is a quarantine zone that stops at the orbit of the moon around the Earth.
Oh boy, yeah.
And the other quarantine zone is at the outermost limit of the solar system.
Yeah.
Okay, so in other words, the entire solar system is under quarantine.
Wow.
All right? Now, let's put ourselves in breakaway civilization shoes once again. All right? If they're examining the same texts in the same way, and eventually they would, because remember who part of their inspiration is. Who's part of their inspiration?
Oh, brother.
Who?
I'm just...
The Nazis.
Well, yeah.
And what did the Nazis do? They set up an entire department of the government, of the SS, called the Ahnenerbendienst. Remember what its job was? It was to go around on archaeological expeditions and dig up all that old stuff and ransack and rummage through every ancient text they could conceive of from India to Latin America.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose, according to Reichsfuhrer Himmler in his little brief when he established this department, was for its use in any potential military application.
Oh my gosh.
So in other words, you know, stop and think how breathtaking this really is. You had one of the world's great powers of the time setting up an entire branch of government, kind of like DARPA, only this version of DARPA was to do nothing but play Indiana Jones and go dig up a bunch of neat stuff and read a bunch of ancient texts from the standpoint of any potential scientific value.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
So in other words, would the breakaway civilization in the United States do that? Sure. They're bringing these Nazis over, for crying out loud.
Yes.
So the idea is going to infiltrate that way alone, plus the fact that you're going to, if you're taking these nutty Nazis seriously, you're going to vet what they said. You're going to go over it. You're going to subject it to your own analysis.
Yeah.
So in other words, I think this is going to be done. So they're going to come across this notion of a quarantine zone. And then they're going to think, all right, there may be consequences if we send out space probes beyond the boundary of the orbit of the moon. There may be consequences. If we send things to... And the other point here, GeorgeAnn, is in esoteric lore, what are the planets associated the most with the gods and this war of the gods?
Mars.
Mars.
Yeah.
What's Venus? Venus is the morning star.
Yeah.
And what's that the name of? The bright and morning star.
Yeah.
Lucifer.
Lucifer, yes.
Yes.
And they
Venus.
also refer to Jesus as
that
being
too, yes.
the morning star.
Yes, yeah. And there's another planet. Obviously the moon, but there's a fourth planet, a major fourth planet that plays a big role in human mythology and wars of the gods.
Saturn.
Now, is this going to inform the breakaway civilization's culture as they reach out and explore the planets? Well, oddly enough, if you look at the planets that they have been most interested in
yeah.
exploring, what are they?
Mars.
Mars.
And Saturn.
And Saturn.
And now Venus.
And Venus.
Yeah.
And the moon.
Yeah.
Gee, isn't that coincidental?
Oh, boy.
Well, obviously not. It's not a coincidence.
Right.
What they're telling you when they do this is, yeah, we are looking into human records. We're just not talking about it.
Right.
Okay?
Oh.
And in the process, of course, they're going to be thinking, are we, in the course of doing so, violating the quarantine? And if so, before we do it, here comes the curveball, GeorgeAnn. Before we take that step, that one step for man, a small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Yeah.
You remember that one?
Yeah, yeah.
Before we do that, it would be a really good idea if we had the means to defend ourselves if something happens.
Oh, boy.
If we touch off some sort of cosmic tripwire.
Mm.
So, yeah, I think this is going on in the back of their heads, too. Now, interestingly enough, Voyager, the Voyager spacecraft that we launched years and years and years ago, has now reached the edge of the solar system.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what they've encountered?
What?
There appears to be some sort of barrier out there.
Yeah.
Way beyond Pluto.
Oh, boy.
That their science has not accounted for. Okay? So in other words, there's yet another tiny little indicator that there may be some sort of scientific basis to all of these ancient human legends.
Yeah.
Well,
I wouldn't want the people of this planet with their mentality to escape into another solar system. I wouldn't want that, Joseph.
Well, I'm less worried about the people on this planet than I am about the people that came here according to the ancient texts. I'm much more worried about them.
Mm-hmm.
They were a really bad lot.
Yes.
We may be related to them, genetically, I don't know. But I'm much more worried about them than I am about us. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not worried about these nuts and Fruit Loops in the breakaway civilization. I mean, it's obvious. Let's look at the NSA spying thing, GeorgeAnn.
Yeah.
This is, I read an article where some German company had computed estimated the computing capacity of the NSA.
Yeah.
And it comes out to be some 5 zettabytes. Do you know what a zettabyte is?
It's gigantic.
It's 1 billion terabytes.
Yeah.
1 billion terabytes. So in other words, 5 zettabytes is 5 billion terabytes of processing power.
Yeah.
That's enough to library and archive every single human communication for 100 years.
Yes.
Now, do you need all of that to track terrorists?
Heavens, no.
No. Do you really need all that even? Suppose they managed to stick an implant right up everybody's nose. Okay. Do you need, right now, do you need all that computing power just to track everybody? No.
Right.
Okay. Do you need all that eavesdropping capability just to blackmail a few worthless senators and congressmen in Congress?
Probably.
Well, maybe, but do you need all that computing capacity to do your high frequency insider off the books trading? Or, sure, of course you'd use it for all of that, but still, this is all a drop in the computing bucket.
Yeah.
So my suggestion is all of this computational power may be related, again, to the UFO story somehow, to something taking place off this planet, to something that they have to game out, perhaps.
Wow.
In their gaming scenarios taking place off this planet or close by or whatever. It may be for tracking our local live next door alien encounter.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Could be.
Who knows? Because the interesting thing is they're coupling this eavesdropping capacity to the new technologies for tracking individual DNA without actually having to sample the DNA. In other words, they can now sequence you remotely.
Yes.
So that's a kind of handy thing to have around if you're worried about who's really human here and who isn't.
Well, I in a joking kind of way, Joseph, these X-ray machines that they've got at that TSA was running at the airports. I kept saying, yeah, they're looking for people without bones.
Well, there's a huge downside to this because it's the same logic of who's really human and who isn't.
Yes.
Well, this is the same Nazi logic that we heard before. Jews are subhumans, Russians are subhumans. Well, on what basis are you saying this?
Yeah.
So in other words, there's the other part of the hidden UFO story is if any of this is not real, it's the occasion for huge amounts of mischief.
Mm-hmm.
Because that kind of gaming and computing capacity would allow you to manipulate perceptions in the matrix even more.
Oh, yeah.
And so much the better if you've got technology that looks like a UFO flying around,
Yes.
So, like I put it at the beginning of the book, GeorgeAnn, this is a book in which E.T. is the main character, but never appears on stage.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
That's why it took me so long to write.
The man behind the curtain.
It's the man behind the curtain.
Oh, wow.
And it may just be a man behind the curtain.
Gee.
Or it may be, something that looks like a man but with slightly different DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look at every so often we have census. A census is just an inventory.
Yeah, that's quite correct. Yeah.
And, I can think, they inventory everything, Joseph.
Yeah.
Down to cattle, down to goats.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me, the stuff that they do. And like recently with the police and all the brutality that's coming out, there's been a suggestion, well, those guys are training and they're on steroids.
Well, so what? If they're training her on steroids, what they're doing is wrong.
Yes, it is. But it's reminiscent of these ancient species, if you will, that were so brutal to man. They taught man war. They taught man terrible things.
Well, this is... any way you slice it, this is the hidden part of human history. If those people are around,
yes,
or have come back,
yes,
and if they are either in league with or hostile to that breakaway group, it's the long and short of it is we are entering the Tower of Babel moment of history. This is why I've spent so much time going over that so carefully in so many books.
Wow, Joseph.
It's because in all versions of the story that have survived, including the biblical, there is no indication that what humanity is doing when it reaches a certain pitch of scientific development is evil. The reason given for coming down and confounding the tongues, or in the Mayan version, dividing the sexes, or in the Mesopotamian version, not only confounding the tongues, and in Plato, on and on it goes.
Dispersing humanity
and setting civilization back to the Dark Age.
Yes.
It's always because humanity is perceived as a threat to the gods.
Yeah.
Always.
And we have this convoluted concept of God and what God is. I mean, it's pretty wacky, George.
Well, yeah, that's the reason I spend so much time with that metaphor, with what I call the topological metaphor in my books. And it will figure, again, in a major way in Financial Vipers of Venice. In fact, that book, and then I've already started researching the sequel to it. There's just no getting around this metaphor. It's what has been done with it in history that either spells a fairly benign and enlightened civilization or just barbaric cruelty, because it's all how you construe it, both in terms of the physics and in terms of the finance and or organization of civilization and so on. It's, in a certain sense, that cosmology that says that we are part of an experiment, that what we're living in is theater. That is very much that whole idea of human history as being a great big huge cosmic theater. That is very much the insight of Hermeticism, and it has had an enormous influence on history that people are just totally unaware. And it's had an enormous influence on literature. I'm quite excited because Dr. DeHart's Shelley Unbound book is finally out. And I have a review coming up tomorrow on the website. This is a book that's very important because if you're reading the book from the standpoint of Mary Shelley, the standard story of Mary Shelley writing a ghost story, you're missing the point of the book. The book, if you understand it as having been written by her husband, Percy Shelley, who is deeply suffused with Hermetic doctrines, and is seeing the transhumanist future with all of its promise and all of its dread. He's seeing it very clearly.
Oh boy!
And he's writing about the cultural effect that is going to come regardless of whether you like what's going to happen or not. It's going to come, and it's going to pose some unique moral and ethical questions. When you read the book that way, he might as well have not written it and waited till the 20th century to write it, because that's how far ahead of the curve he was.
Wow.
And again, all of this plays into all this understanding of human history, which is kind of not the standard history that we learn in school. It's the real one. It's that understanding that's going to play into the formation of policy in the heads of the people running this breakaway civilization, like it or not. They're going to be considering all of this type of stuff. They have to. Why? It's very simple. When you're doing intelligence analysis, you consider all possibilities that are remotely relevant to the situation at hand. And you consider, as a necessary basis for formulation of a response, you consider the worst case scenario and plan for that.
Whoa.
And that's what I think they've been doing.
They're planning for the worst case.
The Tower of Babel.
That's
the worst case. They're planning for the possibility for a catastrophic external intelligently organized intervention. Can I put it any more plainly?
No. That's spooky.
Yeah.
That's really spooky.
It's very spooky. It's very creepy. But it's not beyond the pale. Why? Turn the clock back to the late 1980s. And who are the two world leaders that are constantly talking and trying to sort out their differences? Ronald Reagan.
And Gorbachev?
And Gorbachev.
Yeah.
All right. And at any point, can you tell me in history, at any point, when the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union were constantly talking about extraterrestrial threats?
Oh, boy.
Both of them.
Yeah.
Not just Reagan. Gorbachev did, too.
Yes.
And Gorbachev did it more along the lines of, yeah, the U.S. president voiced these opinions, and I'm simply relating them, although I told him it's much, and listen to Gorbachev very carefully, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, I don't remember his exact words, but listen to what he implies very carefully. He implied that it's much too early to be worried about that yet.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh. So in other words, yeah, we're in the same boat, we're just on a different timeline.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so, that's quite, it's one thing for a Hollywood actor that claims to have seen a UFO and all sorts of stuff to come out and say that. All right. It's quite another for someone who was mentored into positions of power by the head of the KGB.
Yeah.
And who's not Mr. Nice Guy in his own right.
Right.
To be entertaining those kinds of thoughts, much less talking about them publicly.
Gee, Joseph.
Yeah. So I think, I think something's going on, and it's been going on for a long time. They know about it, and they're getting ready. I think that's what all of this is about. Do I have a timetable? No. Do I have any predictions? No. Because the essence of my argument isn't predicting when they're going to make the big disclosure about ET. If you think that's what I'm arguing here, that's not what I'm arguing.
Right.
I'm arguing that there are people in the breakaway group in the national security establishment that think this way, that really do think this way. And this is the guiding, organizing principle of their research and development projects and of their long-term strategies.
Whoa.
So we're going to see this unfold, but what I'm arguing, GeorgeAnn, and it's very important that people understand this, what I'm really arguing is you're going to see it unfold in a series of disconnected public statements that are limited hangout positions. Like, recently NASA's just admitted that one of the purposes of the Curiosity thing is to find Martian microbial life.
Yeah.
Okay. The other interesting thing that NASA has been doing is I noticed Richard Hoagland on his website posted finally, after a couple of years of total silence, has finally posted a paper. And the paper has some pictures of some very stunning things on Mars. In fact, they were you've seen them. They were so stunning, I had to go and look for one of the links myself and see it for myself, and I did, and I saw it. Okay?
Gee, I know.
And there's just no way you can look at this and think any other thing than either somebody's really good at Photoshop, or if this thing is really up there, someone had to have built it.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay? There's no, and if someone built it, you can forget about microbes, folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, brother.
Because number one, this thing is just too dang big. And number two, it's too nicely done.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to see things like this come out in increasing numbers, but they're going to be little limited hangout positions, and they're going to leave it up to us to connect the dots.
Oh boy, Joseph.
Unless ET comes down and parks a big flying saucer over the White House and blasts it off the map like it did on Independence Day.
Oh boy, people cheered.
People cheered, yes, I remember.
Oh my God.
I remember.
Yes.
I think that's what's going on. I think we have to. Catherine Fitz put it very well when she was here on a visit, when she said that, as I began to encounter all the fraud in the federal budget, it finally began to dawn that this fraud was there because the entire federal budget is simply for the purpose of the black budget.
Yeah.
And when she said that, little lights went off, and I said, that explains why there's no responsiveness from the government anymore.
Right.
There's no concern for the people or
reaction,
because it's all now having to do with the black budget and for whatever purposes that represents. So again, the hidden story is the UFO. So she's sitting here and she says, and this bothered me when I was making financial investment advice. And Dr. DeHart and I both looked at her kind of curiously. She said, when you're preparing a prospectus for investors, there is in law a thing called material omission.
Yes.
And if you omit something relevant to a potential investor's decision-making, you have induced, you have fraudulently induced a decision.
Right.
By means of the material omission. When she said that, there was just silence for several seconds. And we all looked at each other and were thinking the same thing. Because if you're leaving the UFO and the hidden system of finance and all of this out of the picture,
right,
as you are making financial predictions and prognostications and so on, that is a material omission.
Oh, boy.
And everything done under the aegis of that material omission is ipso facto a fraudulent inducement. You see, this is, so in other words, it's even a huge financial story.
Yeah.
Whether or not ET exists, it's a huge financial story.
Yeah.
You see?
That's true.
So, I really, these books I'm so captivated by Richard Dolan's idea of a breakaway civilization and all of the massive implications that has.
Yeah.
That, and for me, the biggest part of the story is precisely this financial story and this psychological operations story, and the idea that from their standpoint, they have to be, in my opinion, entertaining this current phase of human history as a Tower of Babel moment.
Oh, my gosh, Joseph. Oh, boy. Yikes. Well, the pictures that you mentioned that Oakland has on his website, either an ancient civilization who are still active left those things, or we left them.
Yeah, one of the two.
Yeah.
One of the two.
Yeah.
I still am. I'm still very much alive to the possibility that Hoagland at one point, years and years ago, said we may well discover we are the Martians.
Yeah.
I'm still alive to the possibility that we may not originate here ultimately on this planet, but may have come here from somewhere else. And I still think that we have genetic cousins out there, and I began pointing that out way back in I think it was Rack of the Black Sun and in SS Brotherhood of the Bell with some of the MJ-12 documents. One of the things that one of those documents stated, whether the document is real or not, isn't for me material. It's what it said that's so arresting. And what it said was something to the effect that the human form may be discovered to be universal in the universe, and that there may therefore be some higher order between physics and biology. And when I read that, I immediately shut the book that I'd read that in and just sat there kind of frozen and thinking for a good hour.
Contemplating, yeah.
Contemplating all the ramifications of what I had just read.
Oh, brother.
But the other part of this, GeorgeAnn, is, again, if we go back to the Cosmic War, to the book, and the way I present it there, you'll recall that this war is fought over possession of very powerful technology.
Yes.
And it's fought not only for the possession of that technology, it's fought with that technology, okay? And it's fought, if you read the records carefully, it's fought between people that are related to each other.
Yeah.
Not just the same species, but actually part of the same house, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right? So in other words, this cosmic war is kind of an interplanetary version of World War I, when all the leaders of the nations that are fighting each other are all related to each other.
Yeah.
Nicholas and Kaiser Wilhelm, they're cousins, and both grandsons and grandnephews of Queen Victoria.
Oh, brother.
And they've got relatives in the Habsburg family, all of this stuff. And when you look at the Cosmic War, what you're looking at in those ancient texts is you're looking at a huge interplanetary civil war.
Yeah.
So in other words, we may be the quarantined black sheep of the family, or we may be the quarantined white sheep of the family.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I do think, that people like Hoagland and Carlotto and people like that have been investigating all these other planetary anomalies, when they make the connection to human history and make those types of statements, I think they're onto something.
Well, Joseph, I know that what we call human beings, some of them have an innate capacity for viciousness, cruelty, terroristic cruelty to their own people, and to people of different races, people of different nations, and where this capacity comes from really fascinates me.
I think I do think that some of the early eugenicists, and I'm not trying to condone their views, I'm simply saying that some of them theorized that this type of sociopathic behavior was in part genetic.
Oh, dear.
I don't know that I would go that far. I mean, I think you have genetic predispositions to types of behavior that can be either reinforced or damped by the context, by the environment. There's
also the theory that when a woman, the baby that she's carrying in her womb, what she sees, how she's spoken to, all these things imprint upon that unborn child.
Well, I can believe that, because I'll confess to something that will sound very peculiar on your show. I remember things from inside my mother's womb.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I do remember specific things. And that may sound weird, but I'm not the only person that's ever said that. Believe it or not, Lee Marvin, the actor, had similar experiences that he remembers. And there's other people, it's not all that unusual, and I think that there's something to that theory. But, ultimately where all this is going to go, I don't know. I'm certainly not here to make any prediction whatsoever about the government coming clean, about the existence of UFOs or extraterrestrials or any of this nonsense, because that's a guessing game like the rapture.
Well, goodness, they can't come clean about their own doo-doo. I mean,
No, I mean, of course not. No, and this is the other philosophical problem. Even if the government, if President Obama were to give a press conference tomorrow and say, I'm here to disclose the fact that, extraterrestrials exist. We've had some minor contact with them, and yada, yada, yada. Well, the first problem that we have to face is who would believe this government?
Who would believe Obama?
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
This is the problem. So, regardless of what they say, ETs exist or ETs don't exist. It's the same problem. They're the capital and trust invested in them is at an all-time low, and it's only going to get lower.
Yes.
So, I'm not here to make any predictions like that one way or the other. On that issue, which is, I think, an issue of huge importance for all of us, because, if it's legitimate, it affects the way we plan our lives, the way we plan our finances, where and how we live, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're left on our own on this one.
Wow. Yep.
And in a certain sense, I think that's kind of a cosmic irony that's very apt, because it's a cosmic question.
Yes.
And we each have to make up our own mind about it.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness, Joseph. Ooh, this has been very insightful.
Well, I hope so. Thanks for having me on. I don't normally talk about books, a couple months before they're out, but I wanted to get these things kind of out there and percolating in people's minds before they picked up the book and read the glittering details.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Because
my goodness.
the devil's always in the details.